Yes, sir. Doing good. The only thing that I'm trying to balance is you want this one to be louder, and I don't want to increase the gain so much that it creates an echo from the other ones. So that's the, right now it sounds okay, but it's not quite the way I want it to sound. Still working on it, but it's better than it used to be.
When somebody goes talk, you can't hear.
Yes. It's just I want to be crisp and everything, you know. Yeah. So we're working toward it. Well, I guess we're 3 minutes past the hour. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our final class in hermeneutics. And we're excited to be able to do this final class together. As you know, tonight, Brother Mike and I will be co-teaching this class. And in just a moment, I'm going to give you the outline of how the class is going to go. But before we do that, I would like us to begin with a word of prayer. So let's bow our heads. Our Father and our God, we thank you for the opportunity to draw this class to a close, and I pray that we would draw it to a close on a positive note. And Lord, as Mike and I work through tonight some difficult texts and try to show the methods by which we would approach these texts, I pray, oh God, that you would give us the grace to be good instructors, that you would give us the wisdom and insight to be able to give good answers. And Lord, where the answers are very difficult, Lord, let us be honest about the answers. And I pray, oh God, Lord, as we consider drawing another class to its conclusion here at the Academy, Lord, that those who are taking this seriously, who are wanting to grow, who are wanting to become better students of the Word, Lord, that you would bless them in that pursuit and use this to glorify yourself and to edify your people. We thank you for all the churches that are represented here and online, and for those who are being ministered to by this time. And we praise you for it in Christ's name. Amen. All right, so we have, over the last 8 weeks, been going through our study of the book, Getting the Message by Daniel Doriani, which has been our text. And so by the end of this course, you should have read that book. And it's focused around an acronym. What is the acronym? Captor. And what does the acronym stand for? Context. Analysis. Problems. Themes. Obligations. And reflection. Well, what we said, and we have gone through these, we've talked about these, we've talked about how to apply these in our hermeneutics, how to apply these in our Bible study. And we said that tonight we are going to allow you, the students, to give us passages to go over. Now, you've had that opportunity for several weeks. You either sent them in by email or handed them in on a sheet of paper. And Brother Mike and I have 9 passages we're going to try to get through in the next hour and a half, which is a lot because some of them are going to take more time than others. But the goal is to try to show you that even if some of the answers are difficult in these passages, we want to use this process of going through the text as we try to discern the meaning. So what we're going to do is Brother Mike is going, or I'm going to go first, Brother Mike is going to go second. We're just going to go back and forth. If we don't get to all 9 passages, then we apologize. We're going to do our best. But we're going to try to do that. The other thing that I want to mention is tonight, being the final night, you have to show me your notebook. And if you're doing this class online, you have to send a picture of some of your notes in just to show that you have done the notebook work. As well as this week, you will receive a copy of the final. The final will be a combination of multiple choice questions, as well as there's going to be a essay question, and there's going to be a section on the final where you are going to give this analysis for a few passages. You're going to take that passage and explain it using this format. And so you'll see that on the test as it comes to you. That make sense? All right. Well, we're going to begin tonight in the 15th chapter of Paul's letter to Paul's first letter to the church at Corinth. So to open your Bible to 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And go to verse 29. And by the way, I want to mention, I didn't put the names of the people who gave these, so if you know who you are, if you turn these in. I will say, though, this was the first one to come in. I forgot who sent it, but this was the first one that came in, and I looked it up and I said, well, that's a doozy. That's a good one right out of the gate, because this is a difficult passage. And by the way, we've done this class as our third time now. It's the first time Mike and I have taught it together. But every time I've taught this class in the past, this last class is always the most fun because people don't turn in easy ones. People always turn in like the most difficult scriptures, and that's kind of what makes this class fun. So this passage says in verse 29, it says, otherwise, what do people mean by being baptized on behalf of the dead? If the dead are not raised at all, why are people baptized on their behalf? All right, so that is the passage in question. And if we want to follow the process, remembering that when we talk about the subject of context, there are actually two forms of context that we have to consider. And what are those two forms of context? Well, historical is the second one. What's the other one?
Literary.
Literary, that's right. And what is literary context? Literary context is? It's what is in the actual text itself. So verbs are verbs, nouns are nouns, adjectives are adjectives, right? Those form a literary context. And that, remember how we said it was like a stone hitting a pond and the ripple effect goes out? The closer the words are to the passage you're studying, the closer that literary statement or sentence or whatever is, the more it affects it. And then as those ripples go further out, it becomes less and less about that immediate context. So we're looking at the literary context. What is the literary context of 1 Corinthians 15? What is Paul focused on in 1 Corinthians 15? The answer is he's focused on the resurrection. He begins in 1 Corinthians 15 by saying that the gospel is made up of three parts. It's made up of the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Christ. If you give up any of those, you've given up an essential part of the gospel. And then, beginning in verse 12, he begins his argument for the resurrection from the dead. He says, if Christ is proclaimed as raised from the dead, how can some of you say that there is no resurrection from the dead? So that is the context leading into this statement. And it goes on down through the argument, as Paul says in verse 19, if in Christ we have hope in this life only, we are of all men the most to be pitied. But then in verse 20 he says, but in fact Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. And then he talks about resurrection. He talks about through one man came death, and also another man came resurrection from the dead, talking about Adam. Verse 22, in Adam all die, so also in Christ are all made alive. And he continues on this argument, and we get down to verse 29, and this is where he says, what do people mean by being baptized on behalf of the dead? If the dead are not raised at all, why are people baptized on their behalf? So the context of this is the context of people who are in some way denying the resurrection. Paul is still addressing the same issue. And he is saying, in context, well, if people aren't raised from the dead, why be baptized on their behalf? Now that doesn't answer the question, but it tells us why he's even making the statement, right? That's the context. That's the literary context. What question is he answering? Is the question of resurrection. Now, what is the historical context of 1 Corinthians? The historical context is Paul is writing to a church which is in the letter, we see from the very beginning, Paul is writing a corrective letter because there are many errors in Corinth, and the church of Corinth had many issues that Paul had to address. Very early on in the letter, he addresses the issue of, some say I'm of Paul, some say I'm of Apollos, some say I'm of Cephas, some say I'm of Christ, right? He's dealing with the differences, the factions that are among them. He's dealing with the issues of how they understand things like marriage in 1 Corinthians 7. He deals with how they understand the Lord's Supper in 1 Corinthians 11. He's dealing with the meat offered to idols in chapter 8 and other things. Throughout the book, he's adding a corrective. And the corrective in chapter 15 is the corrective over the resurrection. So again, this is helping me understand what it is I'm reading. There's something here about the resurrection. The issue is the resurrection. So that gets me into the context. And now we're going to analyze the passage. And we know there's two types of analysis. What are they?
Discourse.
That's right. That's one. Discourse analysis and narrative analysis. So would this be a discourse or a narrative?
Discourse.
This is a discourse. This is a teaching. This is what we would call a didactic portion. And so it would fall under the category of a discourse. Okay, so we're reading this and we're analyzing it as a discourse. Paul is saying, he's asking a question. What do people mean by being baptized on behalf of the dead? If the dead are not raised at all, why are people being baptized on their behalf? So what is happening? People are being baptized for, does anybody translation say for? What is the King James?
Mine says New American Standard for.
For the dead. Baptized for the dead. That's good, and that's because in my analysis of this, I want to stress something about that. Okay? Because some translations say on behalf of. All right, so baptized on behalf of or for the dead. Now, jumping to our third thing in our chapter, what immediate problem do we see?
Baptizing for the dead.
We're baptizing in some form or fashion. Baptism is being done for the dead. And immediately we have some major issues. Especially if we've ever encountered those two guys on the 10 speeds that come to our house and want to share with us how they are elders at the age of 18 within the Mormon church. Because they teach that if you are not a Mormon, that someone who is a Mormon can be baptized on your behalf so as to provide a spiritual benefit to you in some way simply by being baptized on your behalf. So the immediate question, the immediate problem raised in this text is that what Paul is addressing? Is Paul addressing the issue of being baptized for the dead in that way? And if it is, then the next question is Paul endorsing that? And if it's not, then what else could it mean? And so I want to propose at least two ways to understand the word for. Okay, and again, we're still under analysis. I just said we're talking about the problem, but we're still under the analysis part of this. All right, so on the issue of the word for can mean, as we say in the translation, on behalf of. So being baptized for the dead means a person has died and you're being baptized in their place. In their place. That's one way to translate that or to understand it. In their place. So that would be like if Brittany cared for me and I died and Brittany didn't think I was a believer. So Brittany went and said, you know what, I'm going to be baptized in the place of Keith so that my baptism somehow creates a baptism on behalf of or in the place of Keith. And I would appreciate your love and support, even though I think it's heretical. But that's what many people understand this to mean. And it certainly can mean that within the bounds of literary context. Certainly can mean that. There is another way to understand Paul's use of the word for here. And this is one that I'm more, at least in this sense, more interested in presenting because most people haven't even considered this. In the first century, during the time of Paul, there were many people whose whose reason for becoming Christians was because they were moved by the witness of the martyrs. In fact, it has been rightly said that the seed of the church is the blood of the martyrs, or the better way to say that is the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. And therefore, it has been rightly recognized that many people, watching people die for their faith, has inspired them to become believers themselves and reject their paganism and follow Christ. There's a great story of the 49 soldiers. I told this in a sermon just a few weeks ago about how there were 50 soldiers who were Christians and they were being put to death. One of them defected and another soldier took his place, went out and stood in his place and died. They were being killed on a frozen lake. And so the idea is that by seeing the martyr, by seeing what they were doing, they were inspired to believe as they believed, right? And so the phrase baptized for or on behalf of the dead could mean, and within the bounds of the Greek it would bear this out, that I am being baptized not in your place, but because of your witness, because of the dead. And here would be how Paul is making this argument. If I didn't believe in resurrection, if I didn't believe in the resurrection of the dead, how could your death inspire me to follow you? If I didn't believe your death was leading to something better, if I didn't believe in resurrection, how could your death affect me that way? And so if Paul is saying, why be baptized on behalf of the dead? If you think the dead are just going into the ground, how in the world would that affect you? So, is that the best way to translate this? I'm offering it as a suggested second answer. That the phrase for, it does not mean in the place of, but rather it means because of. And here's a way that you can bear this out. If I say, Mike, you're wanted for murder. Now that can mean I want you to commit murder, but it can also mean I want you because you've committed murder, right? Like the word for can have those two different ways of uses, both in the Greek and in the English. And in this sense, if it means baptized for the dead, it can mean baptized in the place of the dead, or rather baptized because of the dead. And if that is the right way to understand it, then there wouldn't really be an issue or a problem to solve. Where the problem comes is if we take this position, then we have to ask the question, were there people in Corinth who were practicing the Mormon, what we would call the modern Mormon practice of being baptized for the dead? The evidence on that, I think, is lacking. I don't know that we know for certain outside of just this text. And again, if this text is understood in the second way, then it's not proof. So we have to ask the question, was this happening in Corinth? From a historical standpoint, we don't know for certain. So we can either take the second view, or we can say, even if Paul is referencing the first view, the next question that comes, and this is where we get to obligations, using our thing, is Paul endorsing this? And furthermore, is he saying this is something we should do? And the text doesn't say we should do it. If this is what's happening, then what we have is we have Paul using an example of something that is happening and asking the question why. He's not obligating us to do this. And so no matter whether we take this view or this view, our obligation doesn't change because neither view obligates us to be baptized on behalf of the dead. If Paul is simply using an example of something that is happening to make his argument, that doesn't mean it's something that we're supposed to do. There are no imperatives. Oh, sorry. I don't know why my voice went high. Maybe.
Puberty.
Yeah, thanks. There's no imperatives in this passage. Will we agree with that? It says, what do you mean by being baptized on behalf of the dead? If the dead are not raised at all, why are people baptized on their behalf? It's two interrogatives. It's not an imperative. There is no command in this passage by which we would need to obey. Neither is it inferred that Paul is encouraging us to obey this. He is simply marking it as something that is happening in the church at Corinth. So the answer is, do we know for certain what Paul is referring to? I would say I don't think we know for certain, but I think we have two good options, and I prefer the second one. Do we know for certain that there are no obligations in this passage? Yes. So no matter how we understand it, it doesn't bear out to an application that would affect how we live out our Christian life. So now we get to reflections, and I'll let you guys ask any questions you might have. But did you see how I did that? Did that make sense? The process.
I understand the question of why are you doing this?
Yeah.
And in a rhetorical answer of don't do this.
Okay.
If there's no benefit to this, and there's no benefit for the recipient, because I take the other position.
Sure.
On behalf of. Good.
But he's proving the validity of the resurrection. That's the context.
Yes, no, I know. But
And so he's saying, why do this if there's no resurrection?
Therefore, don't do this.
I would disagree.
Okay.
I would. Based on the fact that he's not making that argument. He's making the argument for the resurrection. He doesn't say don't do this.
This is a rhetorical.
Yeah, but he's saying you're doing this. Why would you do this if there was no resurrection?
If they're doing it, what is he telling them to do? Nothing? If this is what's going on.
If this is what's going on, he's asking them, why would you do this if there's no resurrection?
And if they are doing it, then what would be the answer? We don't know.
Yeah, he's using this as an example, but I don't see an obligation either way. I don't see.
So if we saw someone else doing that, how would we address that?
I would ask them, again, taking the second position, I don't think that it's the right thing to do. There's nowhere else in Scripture that would indicate in any way that a baptism that I have would in any way affect you.
So we would say, don't do that.
Yes, yeah, I think either way we can say don't do that. Yeah,
saying.
no, I think we can go there. I think we can say don't do that. I'm saying it's not clearly stated.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so that's number one. Hopefully that was helpful. Again, this shows you how much fun it can be and difficult at the same time. All right, Mike, your turn. Phone is recording. So back up.
Okay.
Matthew chapter 12, and it's verses 43 through 45. I'm going to read those and then we'll back up a little bit. It says, "Now, when the unclean spirit goes out of a man, it passes through waterless places, seeking rest, and does not find it. Then it says, I will return to my house from where I came, and when it comes, I find it unoccupied, swept, and put in order. But then it goes and it takes along with it 7 other spirits more wicked than itself, and then go in and live there, and the last state of the man becomes worse than the first. That is the way it will also be with this generation." The context of this is Jesus is rebuking the scribes and the Pharisees. So if you back up to verse 38, we'll read there, and it says, "Then some of the scribes and the Pharisees said to him, 'Teacher, we want to see a sign from you.' But he answered and said to them, 'An evil and adulterous generation craves for a sign, and yet no sign will be given to it,'" meaning that generation, "'but the sign of Jonah the prophet. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the sea monster, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. And then the men of Nineveh will stand up with this generation at the judgment and will condemn it, because they repented at the preaching of Jonah. And behold, something greater than Jonah is here. For the queen of the south will rise up with this generation at the judgment and will condemn it, because she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, something greater than Solomon is here." So this is a historical narrative. This is the gospel. This is all of the gospels are historical narrative. So as we look at the text, we have to say, okay, Jesus comes, this doesn't come out of nowhere by Jesus saying, now when an unclean spirit goes out of a man, it passes through waterless places. In Jesus' ministry, what had he been doing? He had been going to every city, going in, with the exception of a couple. He would go in, he would heal people, he would set up healing camps, and people would come and he would heal them, and he'd cast out demons. Now, there are even passages where Jesus says he went into the city, he healed everybody, cast out all the demons. So when you get to this passage and Jesus is talking about demons, Jesus is fixing to make a very unique statement about that generation. So the people he is talking to, he is calling actual judgment on this generation. What generation was that? Is it a far-off generation? Is it this generation? What's this mean? Near demonstrative pronoun. It is this generation he is speaking to. Every time Jesus talks to the scribes and Pharisees about judgment, he says this generation. Even when you get towards the end of the book, when he's blasting the scribes and the Pharisees at the Temple Mount, he says, such will be with this generation. This generation will not pass in the Olivet Discourse until judgment comes. So he is actually speaking to them. So you get to the passage we're dealing with that he says, now when that unclean spirit goes out of a man, he is talking about casting out a demon out of a man. It says that demon leaves and it goes through waterless places seeking rest. So when Jesus cast the demons out of the demoniac of Gadara, where did he send them? Anybody remember right off chance? Herd of the pigs, and then whatever they did, they ran off the cliff. Okay, well in this case, Jesus is saying, hey, cast this demon out of this person. He didn't send it into any pigs. It's just going out, roaming about, doing its thing, looking for somewhere else. And it says it does not find it. He says, but then it says, I will return to my house from which it came, and when it comes, it finds it still unoccupied, swept, and put in order. He says, look, the very demon that left came back to the same person and sees that there's nothing been put in its place, meaning I think Jesus in this passage is speaking of himself. That something should have been, the demon should have been taken out, the person should have received Christ as the demoniac of Gadara did. And that then demon says that it goes and takes along with it 7 other spirits more wicked than itself. And they go in and live there. Let me ask you something. Is a man in a worse condition with 1 demon in him or 7? 7. He's 7 times worse. Yeah, just logical math. Dude, he's 7 times worse than he was when he came. And Jesus says this. Listen to this now. He's made an analogy. He's talking about this man who had a demon. He cast that demon out. It wasn't replaced with something good. So now that demon comes back with some of his homeboys, and they're going to take up camp, and they're going to do some squatting inside of this guy and take up residence within him. And it says that the last state of that man becomes worse than the verse. Now here it is. That is the way it will be with this generation. What is Jesus saying about this generation? He's saying, I've come. When Jesus died, I have no problem saying that Jesus had eradicated the demonic activity at the time in which he came. Remember, if you look in the Old Testament, demons were not much on the radar. But what happened when Jesus comes on the scene? You see demonic activity coming up everywhere. Jesus goes to the synagogue. What happened? He's got a demon there. He gets off on a boat in Gadara. What happened? You got demons there. You got a boy throwing himself in a fire. You got demons there. And what is Jesus doing? He's casting out demons. He's casting out demons, showing that he has the power over Satan. He says, first you must bind the strong man before you can enter the home. Well, that's what he's saying here. Look, I have come. I have provided deliverance, and now this generation is not going to receive me. Therefore, this generation will be worse in the latter. You say, well, do we have any indication that this generation was going to be basically demon-possessed? And I would say you can, if your understanding of Revelation, is that when Jesus releases the hordes or out of the pit, they go in, and even Josephus says these men acted as if they were possessed, butchering one another. What do we take? We take Jesus' words as this: so it will be with this evil generation. They're going to act like demon-possessed men all over again. Now, questions, disagreements, misunderstandings? Yeah.
So this is only talking about the generation with the scribes and the Pharisees?
He is speaking specifically to the scribes and the Pharisees.
Okay.
They were wanting, how many times did they want Jesus to do something?
Yeah.
Show us a sign. Do us this. Do that. Do this. Yes, sir.
So you're saying that they're, getting the healings from him and casting out the demons, but they're not accepting him?
Sure. I mean, how many people do you think were healed in Jesus' messianic ministry that didn't carry on to follow him?
A lot.
I mean, think about the lepers. You remember 10? The 10 lepers? Only one came back. One of them got what they wanted from Jesus. Don't mean this to be disrespectful. They wanted Jesus the genie. They wanted Jesus to come and give me what I want, but let me go on and do my thing. I mean, that is how a lot of unconverted people do use Christ. Hey, give me the benefits that you got, but I don't want you. Everybody wants the benefits of Jesus, but nobody really wants Jesus because it requires submission to him.
Feed us.
What's that?
Feed us.
Yeah, feed it. Well, that's a good example. What did it say after that? He fed 5,000 people. They rode across to get bread that next morning. Then he says, hey, it ain't about the bread. It's about me. I want you to take me. And what did it say? They all went away. So 5,000 people plus women and children. They all went away. And what did Jesus do? He looked at his own disciples and said, what are you going to do? You going to go with them? And what was the answer? Where are we going to go? You're the only one that has the words of life. Anybody else? Keith, you ready?
Yeah, I was going to ask if you see any application of this passage to us. Is this only applying to them, or is there a way to apply? I have a thought, but
Certainly, in its context, it's specifically speaking about that generation. I am careful to make an application in, hey, if somebody gets off drugs, alcohol, whatever, because this has been used. I'm just going to let you know, I've taught many years in drug and alcohol places. This is the application is if you don't put something in that hole, it's going to come back worse. I'm not willing to say that, because then that's just replacement. I can change somebody's behavior by getting them to do something different. Quit doing this and do that. I'm saying that if a person says they place faith in Christ and they don't continually pursue that, their heart will go astray. That's how I would make the application.
yeah.
Good.
No.
Yeah.
That's similar.
Yeah.
I heard a guy make a good argument, or not a good argument, but a good point with this text, and his point simply was that we see a lot of today, especially with people wanting to have some form of piety, false piety, and he used the phrase clean the house, sweep, put it in order, but it's empty.
Mm-hmm.
It's empty of the Spirit. So it's all of those things that look nice.
That's a picture of the Pharisees in this picture. That's it.
So I
Yeah.
think there is application
Yeah.
that can be made there, that when we do the external things, but we're empty of the Spirit, which is what you said. They
Mhm.
had not really received Christ.
Yep.
I think that's just another way to, an extension of the application.
And Jesus even said to the scribes and Pharisees, you go and you whitewash and you make all this thing to look good on the outside. Dead bones are on the inside, or you clean the outside of the cup and the inside's filled with dirt.
That's right.
Yeah, he uses the same analogy here.
Yeah, so that was all
same
the
analogy.
way to apply.
Yep.
And your house is left unto you.
You desolate. Yep. Mhm. Yep.
And that's a good example of, as I'm coming up, that's a good example of what Mike did was what we should always do. What did it mean to the original audience first? Before we try to make any application to ourselves, the first thing we should say is, how is this being used with the audience? How did the audience understand it? And what was it meaning in their context? Before the thing, and we've talked about this from the beginning of the class, the thing that most people want right as they start doing Bible study is what? What does this mean to me? What does this mean to me? When that's the last thing we should ask. rather than the first, is how does this apply to me? All right, well, it just so happens that the next passage we're going to look at is one that I preached on last week, so that made it easy for me. I preached on the corresponding passage. We're going to look at Matthew 27, verse 50 to 53. I preached the corresponding passage in Mark because I'm preaching through Mark on Wednesday night. And this is the moment of Jesus' death. And Matthew includes a very interesting addition that none of the other gospel writers include. Matthew 27:50. So in Matthew 27, verse 50, and by the way, it's almost like we're giving mini sermons, so this really does feel weird. You're like you jump. It's like speed sermons. Yeah. All right. And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. And behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split. The tombs also were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. Now, you don't have to turn there, but in Mark's account of this exact same moment, Mark in chapter 15 of his gospel includes the last moment of Christ where he yielded up his spirit. Mark doesn't say that, though. It simply says that he cried out with a loud voice. And then in Mark's gospel it says the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. So Mark's gospel contains that. But then Mark's gospel leaves out the rocks being split, the earth shaking, so it leaves out the earthquake and the rocks being split, and it leaves out this very peculiar sentence in verse 52, the tombs were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised, and out of the tombs after the resurrection they went into the holy city and appeared to many. And then verse 54 says, when the centurion and those who were with him, keeping watch over Jesus, saw the earthquake and when it took place, they were filled with awe and said, this truly was the Son of God. Mark's gospel jumps right from the renting of the veil, the curtain of the temple, right to the centurion. Leaves out the earthquake, leaves out the split rocks, and leaves out this massive event that is so seemingly incredible, and yet Mark just doesn't mention it. And neither do the other two Gospels, which leads to some interesting speculation. And I do want to say about this particular text that the person who wrote this text didn't give really a question, but rather just gave us the text. And that's fine. So I'm going to assume that the question is, what's up with the raised people? But was this your question? Was that the question that you were asking, or?
Okay, yeah, that's one of them. Like, who were how many were there? Who were they? And then,
And I didn't mean to call you out on that because I wasn't giving names, but you're here, so.
And then also it says that the graves were open, but did that happen when the earth quaked, and then after Jesus rose, then they rose? I mean, it kind of seems like that they all rose at the same time. That
Yeah.
they were resurrected at the same time. So were they just laying there for 3 days? I don't know.
Okay, I think this was immediate based on the text. I don't think this was when Jesus rose. And again, Mike and I may differ on this. I haven't asked him his opinion on this, so we'll give him a chance to opine in a moment. But based upon just a simple reading of the text, because it says, the tombs were opened right after the rocks were split, it seemed that all this was occurring at the time of the resurrection of Christ. So you got the splitting of the veil, the earthquake, the stones breaking, and this resurrection of an unnamed, unknown, unnumbered group of people. So half the questions that you asked, my answer is going to be, I don't know. Because I don't know how many it were, I don't know who they were, and I don't know their identity. And I know that's less than satisfying. But I wanted to talk for a minute at least about what we are seeing here. Because there are those who believe, and this is an important side note, there are those who believe the Bible contains errors, which we don't in this church teach that. There are also those who are what are known as higher critics of the Bible that not only believe the Bible contains errors, but they also believe that there are textual emendations that are included by the writers to build up an idea about Christ that wasn't true. So not only is it errors, like an error in math, like it wasn't 20,000, it was really 10,000 or whatever, but intentional attempts to try to discredit the Bible by saying, or rather, I'm sorry, intentional attempts to try to add weight to who Jesus was, and then they're trying to discredit by saying those aren't true. A good example of this would be Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman would say that there are things that were introduced into the text later or by the writers to try to teach something about Jesus that wasn't true, but lended to the idea that he was God. So for instance, this is one of the arguments they make is like in the Gospel of John. John's Gospel begins, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. They say, well, that came later. That wasn't really what people thought about Jesus at the time. That was written much later, and they were trying to deify Jesus. And one of the arguments from this particular text is that there was an attempt to deify Jesus by adding all of these celestial events to the death of Christ. Mark doesn't mention any of these, and they argue Mark came first. They say Matthew comes along later, and he adds these in. Well, we know it was darkness because Mark mentions darkness, but what really happened was there was an earthquake, and then there was a breaking of the stones, and then there was also this massive event of resurrection that nobody else records. And the textual critics really go after this passage as something that didn't happen. Now, obviously, we believe that it did happen. So we have to ask the question, okay, one, why is it only here? Why does only Matthew mention it? Why is it that this particular passage and this event is not mentioned in the other Gospels? And why does it give us so little information? And some of what I'm going to say is probably going to be unsatisfying because some of it is we don't know, as far as the answer to that question as to why we have so little information here. But from the text, and remember I said this from the beginning, the text cannot mean what it doesn't say. Text does mean what it does say. From the text, here are the things that we do know for certain. If we believe the Bible's true, we believe every word of it, and we believe that this was written by Matthew under the inspiration of the Spirit to tell us the truth, that at the moment of Jesus' death, several events happened as his death brought them about. His death brought about a massive cataclysm of events that all took place at that time. And that's why going back to the timing of it. I do believe the timing of it is at his death. So you have these things that are happening. They're all intended to witness to the majesty of what just took place. The witnessing of the power of what just took place. The God-man has been killed on a Roman cross, and he has given up the ghost. He has died in that moment, and in that moment, the veil of the temple is rent in two. And I think you probably understand at least the significance of that, right? The Holy of Holies now has been opened, right? That has a massive implication. And the earthquake accompanying this darkening of the sky for 3 hours. And then these people who come out of the tombs. Now, there are those who believe that this is a fulfillment of an Old Testament prophecy about the raising of the dead. And therefore, if that is the case, this is why it would be in Matthew, because Matthew is writing to a Jewish audience who would have understood the Old Testament and who would have understood this significant event in light of their scriptures. So that is why some would argue it's only here, not in Mark's gospel, because Mark is writing to a Roman audience. He's writing to primarily Gentiles who would not have any tie to the prophetic element of how this would have been fulfilled and why it would have mattered. That may not be very satisfying because, hey, even as a person who's not Jewish, I still like the fact that people rose from the dead. Like it still seems like it would have been significant to me. But that's one of the reasons why they would argue, or why scholars have argued why it's in Matthew and not in other places. Like we have the promise of resurrection in Daniel chapter 12. Mike's going to get to that. And some have seen this as at least a sign of that fulfillment of the resurrection, that when the Messiah died, there was this resurrection that occurred. But there's a lot about this we don't know. And there's a lot about this we can only say we know the facts. And the facts are, when Jesus died, there were miracles that accompanied that death. And one of the miracles were that an unnamed, unknown, unnumbered group of Jewish saints. Well, I assume Jewish. It said they were saints, and the believers, there were people who were Old Testament believers, were raised and came in and testified as to what had happened. So this is bearing testimony to Christ's resurrection and the power thereof. So that's my thoughts on Mike. You look like you're chewing at the bit, like you want to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I have to be careful that we have nothing to compare this to. Matthew has already in his book compressed two events into one in Matthew 24. So I understand this as Matthew compressing the earth shook at Jesus' death because of the earthquake and the veil cutting in two. But the earth shook at the time of Jesus' resurrection. And that's why at that time those saints resurrected, their bodies came up out of the ground and they walked into the city. Because it says after the resurrection. So my question in trying to work this out years ago as well is so if it happened in the vernacular, the order in which we're reading it, so did the 3 days before they went into the city, did they pop up out of the grave and stand there alive and just wait for 3 days before they went into the city? Or did Matthew compress two ideas together because he says the earth shook here, the earth shook here. The earth shook at his death, the earth shook at his resurrection. And not only did Jesus rise, but there were saints that went in to testify that he was the resurrected, long-awaited Messiah. That's how I understand it. And I do vacillate. I hold the position, at least as of this morning, that mini resurrection was prophesied in Daniel 12. I do. It's hard. It's difficult because in Daniel's passage too, you have, you've talked about this, it does talk about the resurrection of the dead.
I think this is a picture of the final. I think Daniel is pointing to the final as we've talked about, but certainly there is the promise of resurrection with the Messiah.
Sure.
And so this is almost not a first fruits because Christ is the first fruits, but a sense of this is an event that's accompanying his resurrection with that. Again, you guys didn't pick the easy ones. Y'all picked the hard ones, and this is.
Nowhere did they.
There's nothing else to compare it to.
Yeah.
All right. Any questions?
We don't know how many there was, but we know there's at least two. It's in a plural.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. Good observation. Very good observation. There was more than one. Yeah.
Right. And then they weren't first. Well, at least Lazarus. We know Lazarus was raised from the dead.
Sure. Yeah. They're not the only ones who were raised, for
sure.
I
would even say, Mike, it's more than two. It says many.
Yeah.
At least that's the trend. I don't know.
Right.
Okay.
Three. Let's see. Few. Many's 4 to 5. Something like that. 4 or more. Yeah.
Yeah.
A is 1. A couple is 2. 3 is few. 7. 3 or several is few.
I ask crazy questions of what were they wearing? And what they look like? They weren't looking like something from Tales from the Crypt, were they? You know what I mean? That's the kind of thing that goes on.
Well, and that's another thing I didn't want to. I didn't even get into that. But the question of we know when Lazarus was raised, 4 days dead. By now he stinketh. Right. Always go to the King James translation for that one.
These were decomposed.
Yeah, these are people who's had to have received some form of reconstitution.
Reconstituted body.
I worked for a funeral home for years. It's one of the things I've done in my life, and I've been around a lot of death. The body begins decomposing immediately. So what we do to keep the body from decomposing, the things that we do, are one, very weird, but two, they have to be done pretty quickly because it begins to decompose pretty quickly. This was way before they had refrigerators.
Yeah, it's like, where did the day ascend?
So they had to have had some reconstitution in their flesh.
Did they ascend? Where'd they go?
Yeah, after that, yeah.
Those are answers we don't have.
No. Good question, though. Thank you.
I have to have my phone here because one of this is pertaining to a question to the text.
And after this one, we'll take a break.
Okay. Hebrews chapter 4. I think it's verses 14 through 16. Let me get the question. ready.
You said Hebrews 4?
4, 14 through 16. Is everybody there? I'll go ahead and read. It says, "Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in all things as we are, yet without sin. Therefore, let us draw near with a confidence to the throne of grace, so that we may receive mercy and find grace and help in a time of need." And here was the question. The question says, the text says that Jesus was tempted in all things like we are, yet without sin. Yet does not the very word temptation mean to be tempted? And he defined this as to feel the tug of sin, or even to be allured to it, and would that itself not be sin? How then would we reconcile with this statement, yet without sin? Do we have to redefine temptation, or how else can we resolve this? Well, first and foremost, Jesus was never allured from an internal desire for sin. James tells us a man is tempted when he is drawn away by his own wicked heart. He is enticed. All of Jesus' temptations came from the external. And was Jesus tempted in all ways yet as we? Yes, and categorically. I've said this a million times. Jesus was never tempted to ride his motorcycle on the back wheel of 140 miles an hour by the police officer. Dude, I loved it. See him out there running radar? Meow. Jesus was never tempted to do that. But Jesus was tempted in the wilderness to do specific things. He was asked to turn the stones into bread. Would Jesus Jesus got hungry. If he turned those stones into bread, would there anything be wrong with Jesus being hungry and turning stones into bread? Not at all. But when Satan comes, he says, if you be the Son of God, I know you're hungry. You've been here 40 days. I know you're starving. Why don't you go ahead and take that stone right there and make it bread? Well, then it does not become about Jesus being hungry and making bread out of that stone. It becomes Jesus now submitting to the desires of the devil. That's what it becomes. Same thing with the other. Throw yourself off the pinnacle. I'll give you the kingdom of the world. All of those things. It has to do with Jesus submitting to someone else other than his Father. Now, the question is, one of the questions was, doesn't the word tempted actually, does tempting be sin? Look, a temptation in and of itself is not sinful. Is it? When Jesus was tempted, if you say that the temptation itself is sin, that means Jesus sinned. And what do we know? Jesus could not sin. Not only is Jesus unable to sin. So in this case, it's not redefining it. Jesus was tempted externally, not from an internal desire to do something wrong. He was tempted on an external physical thing, that he was hungry. And in many ways, Jesus could have eaten had he not been asked to do it by Satan, so that Satan would have him then submit to himself. And I think it was one more part of that question. And how then would we reconcile the statement, yet without sin? Because temptation is not sinful. It's succumbing to the temptation. Even in 1 Corinthians, I think it's chapter 10, it says that with a temptation, God always provides a way of escape. Hey, didn't God provide a way of escape for Jesus, even in the wilderness, tempted by the devil? And what was it? What was his way of escape? The Word of God. Man will not live by bread alone, but everything that proceeds out of the word of the Father's mouth. That's what it was. That was the way of escape. Sometimes that way of escape is just leave. Go. Depart. Questions? Anyone? Is that too fast of an answer?
No, I think that was a great answer. And I think we would agree, I just want to ask, would you agree that certain desires are sinful desires?
Sure. Yeah, I mean,
I think
lusting.
I think that's how people think what they mean, and this may be what the questioner thought was. If I have a desire, they call that a temptation, and it's a category difference.
Well, your desire to covet something comes from your heart being dissatisfied from what God has already given you.
Sure, but what I'm saying, like the temptation, like you said, is external.
Mhm.
The temptation, the shiny thing that we shouldn't have, right? That's external.
Mhm.
But my desire for it can be sinful.
Sure, because it's wanting. Guess what? That's covet. Just wanting
Yeah.
something. Look, I walk on a car dealership. I go, man, I'd like to have that car. It's different than going, I'm going to do whatever I have to do to get that car because now I have that desire that within my heart is now the most important thing, and I'm willing to do whatever I have to do to get that. That is now coveting.
Yeah.
That's now coveting. But there's nothing. Yes, sir.
Is there really a temptation if you don't have the desire for it?
Yeah. You don't think Jesus was hungry?
Sure he was.
Okay. You don't think Jesus could have said, man, that brick would be really good if it was some nice barley loaf? Yeah, it'd be good. But what was the actual sin that was going to be committed? Not eating bread. Eating bread was not wrong. Breaking the fast was not wrong. Submitting to the desires of the devil is what was wrong. And if you look at all of our temptations, what do we wind up doing? We submit to the desires of ourself, which has been embedded within us because our first forefather, our original father, submitted to the desires of the devil and said, take and eat. It will make you wise like God. So the temptation in and of itself is not wrong. It's to succumb to that temptation. And you got to look for that escape. Anyone else? Break time?
Yeah, let's take 5. Be back. We'll do a couple more.
That's an interesting question. Yeah, I think that would make it square. There would be more steps. And let's just assume that it's 50%. Let's just assume that it's 50%. Those numbers are significant enough. That's not what we do. So I don't know. I have no idea. I have done that
Our apostasy in the days of
All we got.
No, the point is, the point,
well, Matthew 24, so it would be in the days of Noah. No,
Yeah.
the point he's making is the rapture would be relatively small as
It's unlike the books and the movies that make it says that children are disappearing from the news and pilots are disappearing. It's just a worldwide panic. I believe it's very
children here, because they all go over under the age of 12 or something.
I'm generally speaking. So the coming of the Son of Man will be for in those days before the flood, they're eating, drink, so on and so forth. Yeah, so that comparison.
Miss Johnson was still down the road from where the ark was, and cooking bread, sewing, when they stole it, and next thing you know, the earthworks, she was swept away.
Millions of people this and days from that, you know, so it- Did you have, we were, I know we were here. No, and not would you have done it if they had?
Oh, sure. No, we honestly, we didn't take every passage that was given because some people gave 4 or 5. We took one from every person. That's what we tried to do.
My original thing about the rights of people, that was just as you were talking, I was just sitting here going, what other scenarios could have arisen? It wasn't anything to do with the text, just what other scenarios could have arisen where it was left out of everyone else's and not out of his.
Yeah.
And I just wondered, maybe it was information they got after the fact, they just didn't know about.
Well, just like Luke doesn't use a combination of desolation. Luke referred to people, but a combination of desolation. It makes sense.
Exactly. Yeah, the idea of the Jewish thing, that interesting to consider that. I'm interested to look at Daniel chapter 12. Yeah, and see that comparison between that.
Like you just said,
You're not Super Bowl, are you? All right, guys. Well, we're doing our best to get through these. As you can tell, this is not the easiest thing to do because we have to at least deal with the passage in its context. We haven't done an Old Testament passage yet, have we?
No.
So let's all go to Ruth chapter 3. This one you asked for, and I want to ask this question since you're here and you did ask the question, is what are we answering? But let's read it first, and then do you mind asking the question after we read it? Okay, I appreciate that, because I think I know what you're asking, but I don't want to, sort of like with Miss Brittany, I didn't want to answer what you weren't asking, and I'm still not sure I gave a good answer, but I'm doing my best.
Yeah, it was fine.
All right, so Ruth chapter 3, verses 1 to 5. Says, Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash therefore and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. And she replied, All that you say, I will do. All right, so that was the text that was given to me. I'm going to tell you what I think your question is, and then I'll let you say it. I think that what most people ask about this question was there any illicit behavior? Maybe that would be the nicest way of putting it. Was there any?
Actually, the question
Oh, okay.
I had in mind was she tells her, uncover his feet and lay down his feet. Seems kind of like an odd thing to ask somebody to do. Like, why should tell her to do that?
Oh, great question.
That makes it much
That
easier.
much easier, because some people have looked at this.
That ends all the speculation.
Yes, but some people have looked at this passage and assumed that somehow there is a hidden or veiled innuendo. Like there are those who make that same argument with David and Jonathan, that there was some form of inappropriate behavior between, and the text never indicates that at all. You have to really come at it from a perverted perspective to come to that conclusion. And I think on this, the same is true, and that there's nothing in here that seems illicit, but it is some form of what we would say cultural action is happening. Go in, and I mean, we learn from the text what the culture is. Go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. This is availing herself to him, not in a sexual way, but saying this is her desire is for him, and to submit to him. Again, uncovering the feet. What does the feet represent? And not standing on someone, but it represents being in submission in that position. And we have here the representation of what she is desiring. She desires to be in a relationship with him, and in this relationship which would ultimately lead to marriage. And so she's doing this in a way that she's being told to do because her mother-in-law would have understood the customs and would have told her what the customs were. And this is why it says, she says, I'll do whatever you tell me. Because I don't know. I didn't come from here. I'm a Moabitess. This is not my customs. But I'm going to go and listen and do what you tell me to do. And she did. And in doing so, there was obviously the good end result, which was them being together. I really don't have a lot more than that for you, because I really thought the question was going in a different direction, and I apologize. But is there anything else you wanted to ask about this other than?
No, I mean, I've heard that other thing, but I just never thought that was really.
Yeah, there's nothing in here that indicates, and I think that if there were any type of illicit behavior, that would be for Boaz, who seems to be presented as a righteous man, something that would not be something of a desire for him. So again, neither one of them are portrayed as a person of a person who would violate God's law in that way. Anybody have any thoughts? Additional thoughts?
Well, I believe, like you said, her mother-in-law wouldn't recommend her to go do something.
That was ungodly.
Yeah, 'cause
And what she's telling her to do
Yes.
has a cultural significance. Do this because he will understand what this means. You're offering yourself to him to be in a relationship. All right, that one was easy. And it's good because the next one Mike's going to do is probably going to take the rest of the time. Are you doing the big one?
I can.
Well, I only got one more. So
You want to take yours now?
No. Let's see what happens.
Let me see if this one even came with a question. I think it just came with the text. Yeah, it just came with the text. So, 1 Peter 3. (18 through 20). And I'm glad they didn't say 18 through 22. All right. For Christ also died for sins once for all, the just for the unjust, so that he might bring us to God, having been put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit, in which he also went and made proclamation to the spirits now in prison, who once were disobedient when the patience of God kept waiting in the days of Noah during the construction of the ark, in which a few, that is, 8 persons, were brought safely through the water. All right. There, it starts off, this has to do first with the atonement of Christ, okay? It right at the beginning, Christ died once for all, the just for the unjust. He was the just, we were the unjust. He died in our place, bringing us to God, reconciling us, as Keith's been preaching on Sunday mornings for the last 2 weeks. And having been put to death in the flesh, I really believe that's talking about his fleshly body being put to death, but then he was made alive by the Spirit. And we know that that was a Trinitarian action. Not only did Jesus say, I only do what God tells me to do. He told Pilate, no one takes my life, I lay it down and I'll bring it up again. But it also says that Jesus was raised up by the power of the Spirit. It was God, Jesus, and the Spirit. A Trinitarian action was the resurrection. But now we get to the difficult part. So that he might bring us to God, but made alive in the Spirit, 19, in which he also went and made proclamation to the spirits now in prison. Okay, huge problem. Spirits. Who are they? Who are these spirits? Are they connected to Genesis 6? Are these saints? Well, let me do it this way first. The dead in Noah's time? And I will say unsaved or saints. That's the 3. We've got to figure out who are these spirits. And it says here that he went, who once being disobedient, this is verse 20, who once being disobedient when the patience of God kept waiting in the days of Noah. So, we can say it's not these. When I put this over there, I'm not saying the saints are bad. I'm just saying we can eliminate this because it says they were disobedient in the days of Noah. You see that? So we can say, hey, the spirits that he went and made proclamation to that are in prison, that's another thing. Why were they in prison? They were disobedient. When? At the time of Noah. That's when these spirits were put in prison. Now, that leads to who? Which one are these? Is it the Nephilim? Or is it the unconverted? Now, it says that God kept waiting in the days of Noah during the construction of the ark, in which a few were saved, 8 persons, and they were brought safely through it through water. So, who are these spirits? If we need to go look at Genesis 6 to see, is it these guys? So go to Genesis chapter 6. And this was one of the questions. And usually when we do question and answer, I say no questions about the Nephilim. Because it is without fail, you get a question about who is the Nephilim. Did I say chapter 6 or 4? I think chapter 6. Okay. And we'll get in verse 1. It says, Now it came about when the men began to multiply on the face of the land, and the daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men were beautiful. And they took wives for themselves, in whom they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he also is flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days. And also afterward the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, those who were the mighty men of renown and of old. So let me put this here so I'll keep flipping back. Well, first of all, we have to define, we know when this is taking place. This was taking place before the flood. This is actually, he's given a description about when the sons of God saw the daughters of men were beautiful. And I know we have to say, okay, who were the sons of God and the daughters of men? That's what we have to ask before we can try to, and we're not going to finish, to try to figure this out. Now, what you need to do is you're going to have to back up to chapter 5. And you're going to see the generations of Adam. Okay? You have, after the killing of Abel, you have the genealogies of then Adam to Seth, and then Cain. Okay? Before you get to the sons of God and the daughters of men. I will say this in short, that in the sons of God, I would say, are the descendants from Seth. The daughters of men, Cain. That's how I understand it. You say, well, doesn't Job say that there was a time when the sons of God came to the throne room of God? That's a totally different genre of writing, totally different book. We shouldn't use we shouldn't use Job to tell us what Moses is saying in Genesis chapter 6. We use the context of it. The sons of God were those who followed God. Why did Seth have to be born? Because he needed to replace the righteous line of Abel, who was murdered by Cain. So now we're seeing that. It says that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful. Basically, the descendants of Seth, who were following God, saw the daughters of Cain and was like, them girls are hot. And what does it say happened? Because they took them, they did the same thing that Adam and Eve did. They saw, they looked, they took. Same thing. Saw that the fruit was good, they took it, looked at it, took it. All right? Same thing. Same thing happened. Same words are used. Exact same are used. So now you have the proliferation of evil that goes across the land before the flood, because now you have those descendants of Seth intermarrying with the daughters of Cain, and you have a proliferation of evil. And that's it says this right here, that when they took the daughters of men themselves, wherever they chose, and the Spirit of God said, because he is flesh, nevertheless it'll be 120 years. And then we get to the verse about the Nephilim. The Nephilim are not saying that they are the Nephilim. They're not saying they're these fallen angels. It doesn't say anything about that. It's just telling us when this happened. It says when the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, afterward the sons of God came unto the daughters of men, and they bore children, and they became the mighty man of old and of renown. The Nephilim. Some translations will translate that giants. Okay? The word does not mean giants. It means fallen ones. Nephal means fallen ones. Even, let me just say this. Even if you hold the position that the sons of God intermarried with the daughters of men, is an angel a seminal creature? And I don't mean seminal like UFC. Ooh, I'm not talking about that. Do they have semen? Can they reproduce? Okay, so we can take these as being the hybrid mix between humans and angels out of the question. They're not seminal creatures. They do not have the ability to procreate. Okay? Out of the question. Can we say that these were ruthless fallen men? Yeah, we can. Not a hybrid that came because of some fallen angels having sex with women. That's not what we're talking about. The text doesn't even say that. So, now we can say it's not these. These were destroyed in the flood. So, what are the ones that were go back to 1 Peter. Who did he preach to? It says that he went and he made proclamations to the spirit now in prison who were once disobedient in the time of Noah. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. The plain reading of that text sounds like Jesus went into the place of the dead and preached. But we all agree that that's what it sounds like. Yes? Yeah, I would agree. That's what it sounds like. Only if we didn't have at the beginning of 1 Peter where he tells us something different. He says in chapter 1 verse 2:5. Hang on, I lost my spot. I've lost my spot. Now I look like a dummy. I will find it just a second. It says that he preached through the prophets, through the Holy Spirit. I thought it was in chapter. Okay, here it is. Verse 10. As to salvation, the prophets, this is chapter 1, verse 10. As to the salvation, the prophets, meaning Old Testament prophets, who prophesied of the grace that would come to you, made careful searches, inquiries, seeking to know what person or time the Spirit of Christ within them was indicating as he predicted the sufferings of Christ and the glories to follow. Who was preaching through the prophets? What's the text say? The Spirit of Christ. So, when was Noah preaching in the time of the flood? Yes. What does 2 Peter say? It said he was a righteous preacher of judgment. So was Noah preaching in the time of the flood? Or before the flood? Yes. Who was preaching judgment through Noah by 1 Peter? Spirit of Christ. Therefore, we would say that the spirits that are in prison were because of the preaching of Noah and they didn't turn. Not that somehow Jesus went into the depths of the earth and preached to them. I know that the Apostles' Creed says that Jesus descended into hell, right? But we should understand that does not mean that Jesus actually descended into hell in the sense of He went down, his body and his soul went into the depths of hell. Jesus went into the pains of death and to the judgment of God, not after his death. He was enduring that on the cross. We would all agree with that. And that he did not go to hell and be tormented by Satan or anything else. But we do know this, that when Jesus did die, he was immediately in paradise, because what did he tell the thief on the cross? Today, what's that? Yeah, so we know that he didn't go to hell. So some people say, well, that's what he did in those 3 days. He was preaching judgment to these people. Well, okay, well, if that's, you have to ask the question, if that's what Jesus was doing for those 3 days, why would he only preached unto those who died at the time of Noah? Right? Why would he have preached to the ones that died in the time of Abraham? Why not? Because that doesn't answer the question of when was this preaching going on. That preaching was going on to those spirits who were already dead. They were condemned under the preaching of Noah in the time before the flood. Now, if you want to disagree with me, that's fine. But that's the conclusion. There is a belief that in that time that Jesus went, he went to Hades, which was the place of the dead, and he preached, giving them another opportunity to be saved. One, that is absurd. There's no other place in Scripture that you can go to and say there's post-mortem evangelism. It's absurd. It's appointed a man once to die and then to judgment. And we're out of time.
Yeah, and I got a few things I need to say. But
any questions I can try to clear up before? It's hard to do. That could take 2 weeks to try to work all that out. Good.
No. I got to talk to the class about the.
Any questions I need to clear up? You look like you got one back there.
Good observation.
What you got? Well, so when somebody's biting their lip, what you got?
Well, the question then comes up, why
Yes,
did he bring it up? And I suppose the answer to the question of why it was he decided to talk about the time of Noah was that he wanted to get to this imagery of the flood corresponding to baptism in the verses that you don't want to deal with.
Because that's not what they add. I don't want to deal with it. It's because that's what. No. And we can spend another 2 weeks dealing on it corresponding with baptism.
Yeah.
I believe that uses a metonym, and we can talk about that after class if you want.
But based on, assuming that your interpretation is accurate, and I like it, the question...
I could be wrong. I'm a exegetical committee. Look, I'm not saying that mine is correct. I'm saying this is my conclusion. If somebody else comes to another and y'all like it and want to take it, that's fine.
So my only question was, I guess, why then was it important to talk about those dead at that time? And I kind of half answered it for myself that perhaps that was necessary to get to the next point he was about to make. Does that sound legitimate?
Because of they were saved through the waters of judgment.
Yeah.
That's actually what they were saved through. I mean, we often talk about the ark saving them, and it did, but it was the waters that actually lifted up the ark. And that's what saved. I mean, don't get me wrong. Being in the ark was where they needed to be saved. But they were saved through the rising of the water, which lifted the ark, that not engulfed the ark. But if you want to talk about some more of that afterwards, I'd be more than glad to do that. All right. You ready?
Yeah, I gotta finish this up. Well, guys, we didn't get to everything, and that's okay. We do our best. I will tell you, the first year we did this class, this is the third time. First year we did this class, I spent an hour on one question, so I learned a valuable lesson in that class, because everybody who had turned in verses felt bad that I didn't get to theirs. And so if we didn't get to everybody's tonight, but we did do 7. Didn't we do 6 or 7? So I mean, I think we did our best to try to get through. So here's the deal. We are now at the end of this course. You will receive in an email this week a final exam. Final exam, as I said earlier, will include multiple choice questions that will all be from your book. Every single question. We had some issues with the last time. Every single question will be from your book, and primarily it will come from the latter half of your reading, because the first quiz we did at week 4 was the first half of your reading. So the vast majority of your questions are going to come from the latter half of the book. Look for the big words. If you're having trouble, and it is open book quiz, if you're having trouble finding the answers, most of them are going to be in the bold sections. That's where I'm getting these. That's where the questions are coming from. Yeah, I'm not trying to trick you. I'm trying to help you find and know the information well and internalize the important things. So keep that in mind. But also don't forget, when I ask for an essay, I want an essay. An essay is not 3 sentences. Okay, and I'm not trying to insult or impugn anyone. Typically an essay is 5 paragraphs. Now, you don't have to necessarily do 5 paragraphs, but at least 3. Some type of introduction, some type of body, some type of conclusion. Please keep that in mind. It's not just 3 sentences. That does not an essay make. And that's a big part of what I'm looking for, that you have actually learned and can express what you've learned by writing it. And remember this, you're taking the test through a computer program. Do not write your essay in the computer program. You can go in, look at the questions, even print them. In fact, what I'll do is I'll try to send a PDF out. You cannot take the test with the PDF, but at least the PDF will come to you in your email. You can look at the PDF before you actually go in to take the test. That way, you're not trying to do it on the fly, right? You'll have the opportunity to do that. Okay, everybody who's taking this, and now we've got about 30 students that do this through online. You need to send in a picture of your notes. Everybody, I'm going to look at your notebook before you leave tonight. If you're going for the certificate and then you're done, I'll check you off. But everybody else, do it through online. Send it in. Everybody's got my email address, and that's how we correspond. We are getting a new website. Sarah, who is the one who does our website for us, a couple weeks ago, the website we use, sovereigngraceacademy.org, went kaput. She fixed it for us. She went in and fixed everything. But in the fixing of it, we determined what the problem was, and we are actually going to go with an easier system for the next semester. So our next semester, you will have to re-sign in to a new website, but it'll be better and easier to use. And hopefully more going forward, even a better experience for everybody. Next class is going to begin in August. It is going to be a survey of the book of Acts. It's going to be a New Testament 201 class, because our previous New Testament class was a 101 class. This is going to be a New Testament 201 class. Mr. Burt's going to be leading that class. Between now and then, you have an opportunity to earn a credit in between, or a certificate in between. If you want to take a previous New Testament survey class, which would be a great introduction to what Burt's going to do, and you haven't taken our New Testament class before, our 101 class, it's all available online. I'm going to send all the links out in an email. If you do all the videos, take notes, send me your notes, and you take the tests, you can get a certificate, and you don't even have to come to class. You can do it all at home. We're going to offer that just over the summer, and that will give you the opportunity to prepare for the 201 class if you haven't taken that class before. Like I know you already have, Corey, so you're one of our guys who've been here for a few years. Did you take the New Testament class, you guys? So you guys have already done it. So if you've already done it, you don't have to. But if you've never done the New Testament 101 class, this would be a good primer and introduction for what we're going to do in the 201 class. Everybody good with that? Any questions? Was this helpful to watch us do this? I think it was a lot of fun. Thank you, Mike, for all that you do for the church and especially for this class. I've had a lot of fun teaching with you, even when we disagree. That's fun. Mike and I live to disagree. Agreeably. Let's pray. Thank you, Lord, for this time that we've had to be together. I pray that this has been fruitful for your people. And I pray that we've been good examples of, even when we disagree, to do so in a way that still builds one another up and encourages to look to the text for our answers. Lord, I pray that the things that we've learned in these last 8 weeks would be used by you to make us better students of the Word. But not just that we might grow intellectually, but Lord, that we might grow in our obedience to Christ. For what does it profit a man if he knows the Word but doesn't do the Word? James tells us to be doers of the Word and not hearers only. Let us, Lord, take what we've learned and apply it. In Jesus' name, amen.